So here we have a chapter that's going to deal with a multitude of topics because that seems to be what occurs in the book of Deuteronomy. We start off looking at animals for sacrifices, and then we transition to the king and what he is forbidden from doing. Deuteronomy 17:1. You shall not sacrifice to the Lord your God an ox or sheep with a blemish, or any defect whatsoever, for that is an abomination to the Lord your God. God is very selective on what he receives. He doesn't accept trash. He doesn't accept damaged goods. He only wants the best. If somebody is to be making an offering to the Lord, they are not to reach into the trash pile and pull something out to give to him. He demands the best. So when it comes to animals for offerings, the animals need to be without blemish. So they can't have crazy spots on them. They can't be sickly, have diseases, missing eyes, missing limbs. They need to be in good condition, the best condition, really, that they would be prime animals. And only then would the Lord be willing to accept that as an offering. We've got some pretty severe language here as well, referring to it as an abomination. So not only is it not accepted, it's actually insulting to the Lord to offer one of these animals that has a blemish. Deuteronomy 17:2. If there is found among you within any of your towns, which the Lord your God gives you, a man or woman who does what is wicked in the sight of the Lord your God by trespassing his covenant. 17:3. Who has gone and served other gods and worshipped them, or the sun or moon or any of the host of the heavens, which I have forbidden. So if these things are true, and it has been determined that this is happening, they are to be sentenced to death. So they are to take them out of the city and stone them to death. And those that said these things were so. The covenant was essentially a contract between the Lord and the descendants of Israel. We saw the written version of this on Mount Sinai being written on tables of stone, and then they were eventually stored within the Ark of the Covenant. So for someone to be breaking the covenant, they are breaking the rules that are written on them pieces of stone. I believe this would be an infraction on the portion that refers to "Thou shalt have no other gods before me." So we have quite a few things here mentioned. First, we have deities in the conventional sense. So maybe this was Ashran or Baal or whoever the local deities were. But beyond that, we also see mention of the sun and the moon and the stars, the heavenly bodies. Now this could be astrology, an extension of what we saw previously in the Tower of Babel, looking to the stars for answers or direction, placing trust in something other than the Lord God when it comes to one's life. These are all things that the Lord forbade them from doing, for there are many paths to destruction, and God is a jealous God, and he wants to be number one. He doesn't want his people going off and doing all this other stuff. Deuteronomy 17:4. And it is told, and you hear of it, then inquire diligently, and if it is certainly true, that such an abomination has been committed in Israel. So maybe these things are happening and other people start finding out about them. They hear a rumor of this stuff going on. And this is the conduct that they're supposed to do when they're faced with such a rumor that one of their brothers or sisters of Israel has trespassed in this manner. They are to go and investigate to find out whether or not this is true or not in order to bring forth justice. If this sin is permitted to exist, even if it's only a couple people,
it will eventually permeate and infect others, and it will lead to greater levels of destruction than if it was to be dealt with earlier on. Deuteronomy 17:5. Then you shall bring forth to your town's gates that man or woman who has done that wicked thing, and you shall stone that man or woman to death. So long story short, they found out this person or these people here were guilty, and they have been sentenced to death. So they're taken out of the city, and the people that laid the charge upon them, they're the first to cast the stones. So there's a certain level of responsibility that way when it comes to this scenario. Now, I would imagine that in most instances, it would be someone close to the perpetrator to be the one to discover it, whether it's a family member or a neighbor or whatever the scenario is. So I'm sure that would make it more painful. But the Lord is to be in a higher esteem than one's own family or loved ones. Deuteronomy 17:6. On the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses, he who is worthy of death shall be put to death. He shall not be put to death on the evidence of 1 witness. So when it comes to the capital punishment here, we see there is a requirement for more than 1 witness. That multiple witnesses are required, or multiple pieces of evidence are required to convict the person and to sentence them to death. This is a level of safety set in place to prevent false accusations leading to the death of people. Deuteronomy 17:7. The hands of the witnesses shall be the first against him to put him to death, and afterwards the hands of all the people. So you shall purge the evil from among you. Like we saw before, that if someone is going to make this accusation, that if it comes down to the death penalty, that they need to be the first to cast the stones. I'm sure this places a tremendous amount of pressure and also serves to be a little bit of a deterrent and to keep things fair and just. Kind of an interesting system, really. Deuteronomy 17:8. If there arises a matter too hard for you in judgment between one kind of bloodshed and another, between one legality and another, between one kind of assault and another, matters of controversy within your towns, then arise and go to the place which the Lord your God chooses. 17:9. And you shall come to the Levitical priests and to the judge who is in office in those days, and you shall consult them, and they shall make clear to you the decision. This is some reassurance here that in the event that the situation is too complicated and they don't know what to do, that they simply need to go to the location that the Lord's dwelling, so where the tabernacle is and later on the temple. Go there, get advice, and find out what to do in this particular scenario. Sounds similar to the justice system where they have different levels of court. And if the lower courts can't figure it out, or if it's too serious of a matter, then it is elevated to the next level. Deuteronomy 17:10. And you shall do according to the decision which they declare to you from that place which the Lord chooses, and you shall be watchful to do according to all that they tell you. 17:11. According to the decision of the law which they shall teach you, and the judgment which they shall announce to you, you shall do. You shall not turn aside from the verdict they give you, either to the right hand or the left.
So the judges or the priest are a higher authority. So if the case gets to that point that it needs them to review it, and they make a judgment, that judgment needs to be followed through. I could see certain scenarios where somebody thinks that the judge would go one way, so they bring the case to the judge, and then the judge does the complete opposite thing. And they're worse off if they didn't do anything, if they didn't bring the case to him at all. But they have to follow through with what it was said, so that there is no question, there is no ambiguity. Once it's raised to this higher level and they make a decision, that's it, it's over. Deuteronomy
17:12. The man who does presumptuously and will not listen to the priest, who stands to minister there before the Lord your God, or to the judge, that man shall die. So you shall purge the evil from Israel. This sounds like a form of contempt of court, where somebody, they didn't like the outcome or they didn't like the decision, so maybe they're in rebellion. They don't want to go with that. And because of their rebellion and because they are being presumptuous with the orders given by these higher authorities, they are to be sentenced to death for their disobedience and not recognizing the authority that was given to them by the Lord God. Sowing seeds of discourse is not a good thing, and it needs to be dealt with. Deuteronomy 17:13. And all the people shall hear and reverently fear, and not act presumptuously again. So when a judgment is made, it must be heard and obeyed. And once it gets to this point, it is out of the hands of the people, and it is in the hands of the Lord. So at that point, they can choose to be obedient or they can choose destruction. Deuteronomy 17:14. When you come to the land which the Lord your God gives you, and you possess it and live there, and then say, we shall set a king over us, like all the nations that are about us. So originally Israel was supposed to be under the Lord, that the Lord would communicate to his prophets, such as Moses, or to the priests, and then the information would filter down to the people. That's how the relationship was supposed to be. But the Israelites, when they see the great kings of these other nations around them, they have their own desire for a king. It wasn't the system that God intended for them to have, but it is what they desire. So God's putting rules in place for what to do when that happens. When they desire to get a king, how to select him, how he's supposed to act, and the rules and regulations for kingship. Deuteronomy 17:15. You shall surely set as king over you him whom the Lord your God will choose. One from among your brethren you shall set as king over you. You may not set a foreigner who is not your brother over you. So God is the one who controls the leadership of all the countries in the world. They're only given power by his permission. And when it comes to the leadership of Israel, he is going to select the leader for them. It may not necessarily be the leader that the people want at that given time. Sometimes God gives Israel a leader that is kind of a thorn, and that's the way that he kind of chastises Israel for their disobedience. Of course, there's other times where he brings in a great king who can make things happen. And of course, he has selected the greatest king of all to be the true king of Israel, to look after the king in the eternal form. Anyway, when it comes to selecting a king, they are not allowed to have a foreigner be the king of their country. So if they're going to elect someone to a kingship or make a kingly line, it needs to be one of the descendants of Israel. Deuteronomy 17:16. But he shall not multiply horses to himself, or cause the people to return to Egypt in order to multiply horses, since the Lord said to you, you shall never return that way. So this future king, he is not allowed to multiply horses. Horses are great and mighty animals, and very effective at war, be that mounted from horseback or pulling a chariot. They are tremendously effective when it comes to war. And even into the First World War, the horses were still used in battle. I guess they were still used after that, but to a much lesser extent. But throughout history, horses have been used for battle. So the idea here is that God does not want his people going around making war with everybody around them. He doesn't want his people to be a warrior people. He wants them to be consecrated to him. And as we are going to see later on, the kings didn't necessarily follow God's rules, and some of them did multiply horses. Of course, there's also the forbidding of going down to Egypt in order to multiply horses. They're not really supposed to go back to Egypt. They went through all that to get out of Egypt. They're not supposed to go back there, and they're not supposed to go there and breed horses either. So, Deuteronomy 17:17, and he shall not multiply wives to himself, that his mind and heart turn not away, neither shall he greatly multiply to himself silver and gold. When it comes to the old world, negotiation was king, and relationships between families was very important. So oftentimes a daughter would be given to another family as a method of increasing a relationship, improving the relationship. And this, of course, expanded to kings as well, that people would want to have good relationships with a certain kingdom, so they would send their daughters over to marry into the family. To a certain extent, men want their wives to be happy, and making war with their families was typically a bad method of doing that. So this could compromise decisions, and that's only one aspect. Another more insidious aspect would come from the idea of a woman bringing her pagan idolatry into the king of Israel. Whether or not he submits to it or follows it, it doesn't matter. It is the temptation that should not be there. It is the voice in the ear that one should not hear. So it is very problematic for this to occur. Of course, a third aspect to this would be the idea that God desires man and woman to be together as a pair, and he does not want harems to exist, for a man to have multiple wives, to be pulled in many directions from women. He wants the two to function together as one flesh. As a fourth reason, this would be reflective of the people of Israel. If they saw their king doing these things, they would think that they could do that as well. So it would make a sin permeate throughout the people. Deuteronomy 17:18, and when he sits on his royal throne, he shall write for himself a copy of this law in a book, out of what is before the Levitical priests. 17:19, and he shall keep it with him, and he shall read it in all the days of his life, that he may learn reverently to fear the Lord his God, by keeping all the words of this law and these statutes and doing them. So the king or the ruler, they should be at a higher standard than the everyday person, especially if they're trying to lead. So when it comes to understanding God's law and God's rules, we have this ordinance here that the king is to write a copy of the law. So he's to write it all down manually. This is a way to allow him to have a greater level of understanding. Not only to have his own personal version that he can reference, but the act of writing it down would be slow and meticulous, and hopefully the wisdom that is found in the law seeps into his bones, and that he learns to reverently fear the Lord God and to uphold his statutes and ordinances. Deuteronomy 17:20, that his mind and heart may not be lifted up above his brethren, and that he may not turn aside from the commandment to the right hand or the left, so that he may continue long, he and his sons, in his kingdom in Israel. All this is done in the hopes that this man will be a good king, that he will know God's rules and be able to follow them, and to lead his people in a way that would be pleasing to the Lord. And of course, there is benefit to this as well when it comes to his legacy and his descendants in the future, as well as having a good relationship with the Lord God, the one who has the power over life and death. We are going to see some great kings in the books to come, but we are also going to see a lot of terrible leaders. Probably a lot more bad leaders than good leaders in the history of Israel.